Okay. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you are connected. My name is Bertrand Muhonga. I am an engineer with a Bachelor of Science in Petroleum Engineering from Merida College, and I'll be your moderator for the second presentation of the day. First, I want to say welcome everyone to this webinar and thank you for your presence. It is always a pleasure having you with us. For any questions related to this webinar, please address them on the Q&A section and we will try our best to answer all of them at the end of this presentation. Now, let me introduce to you our speaker, Mr. Kurt D. Armbruster, whose topic today is geologic input to well planning with respect to well control incident. Mr. Kurt is a founder and chair of the CSPG Operation Geology Division. He earned his undergraduate degree with specialization in geology from the University of Alberta in 1998. During his undergraduate, he worked his summer at the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology in Drumheller, Canada. After graduation, he worked 12 years at the junior company in Calgary, Canada, in the Western Canadian Sedimentary. Mr. Kurt Armbruster drilled over 400 wells into the Cretaceous system, ranging from Etienne to Maastrichtian. In 2011, he joined Shell Canada as an operation geologist in their unconventional exploration team. Mr. Kurtz participated in the planning and drilling of over 12 exploratory horizontal pads, de-risking unconventional Cretaceous and Triassic plays, and became an Operation Geology SME. After departing Shell in 2016, Mr. Kurt Armbruster founded the Operation Geology Division of the Canada Society of Petroleum Geologists, which hosts monthly talk on the wide-ranging subjects of operation geology. In late 2019, he joined the CSPG Board of Directors. Welcome, Mr. Kurt Armbruster. The mic is yours.
Thank you, Petrel, for that wonderful introduction. As he said, my name is Kurt Armbruster, and I've got a good 17 years of experience in the industry. We've drilled over 400 wells, including a good 12 or more pads, horizontal pads in various different systems from the Triassic to the Cretaceous. I spent 12 years with a junior company here in Calgary and then moved to one of the super major for another 5. And as he said, I'm the director of the CSPG and founder of the Operations Geology Division. And we host monthly talks about operations geology starting in September and running to about May or June. So I'll have some links at the end of the slides so you can see what's up with that. And let's get started. All right, so first I'd like to acknowledge a few people that helped me out with this presentation. Mr. Tom Cox, who was with Schlumberger at the time. He gave me access to Petrel and let me get some screen captures. And we got our data for that Petrel project from IHS Markit. Peter Wallace, who helped me edit my program initially. Mike Tomlinson, who gave me this flare animation over here. The Glenbow Archives, who provided me with the photo of the lodgepole blowout, which you saw at the introductory slide there a minute ago. Dr. Amy Fox and Steve Nass, who let me borrow some of their images from some of their own slide packages. So just some early acknowledgements, and we'll get on with this. So I'm not a drilling engineer, I'm an operations geologist. So if you do have any drilling engineering questions, please talk to a drilling engineer. This is well control from my point of view and my opinions. So we're going to have a brief yet high-level overview of well control, and probably not comprehensive, but it's as good as I could get it. We'll talk about a few concepts and a few common examples and opinions of mine with regards to well control. Then we'll get into a Petrel workflow where we'll visually display well control incidents and a cross-section. And beyond that, I encourage you to dig deeper. There's a ton of information about well control online. And there's even been a good 3 or more presentations in this very series about well control, including kick tolerance, some discussion about the Macondo incident, and a really good discussion about well control in general. So if you haven't seen them already, I encourage you to go back and check out those videos. There's a lot of great information there. Quick little outline for you before we get started. We'll start with talking a little bit about process safety and well planning, including what a geologist's role might be in process safety. Touch on circulation and well control. Then we'll get into pore pressure and fracture gradient prediction, or PPFG. I'll mention some of the key aspects of that, and with the workload distribution model that I used at one of the companies where I worked at. Then I'll talk about kicks and blowouts with a brief definition and some of the warning signs to expect if you're on the rig. We'll show some examples. There'll be some quite shocking video, I hope, and discuss a brief kick and blowouts table. Then we'll visualize that data, the table, into a cross-section using Petrel. And after you do that, I want you guys to share that. It's really important to me, if you have the visualization of these data, that you share it with the rig, and you can actually improve the safety workflow out on the rig. Some of the challenges with going forward with this, there will always be some pushback when you're trying to change things. I'm on a one-person mission to try and change a little bit of the rig culture to get a little more of the geological aspects discussed on the rig. Some other things you might want to do with Petrel to promote safety and other aspects of drilling. And then we'll finish off, of course, with some summary and Q&A. So process safety is an important aspect of planning. We have the API definition of process safety on the screen right now. I'll let you read that yourself. It's very long and wordy. But from my point of view, process safety is essentially everything you do in the office with respect to planning, design, and documentation of a project. And that could be anything from drilling a well to building a floating LNG facility. The purpose for process safety is anticipating and mitigating any potential hazards, preventing the release of contaminants into the environment, and especially with drilling wells, right? A blowout of oil or natural gas, or worse, sour natural gas, can be quite devastating. And ensuring that everyone out on our facilities goes home at the end of the day, right? And especially with all their fingers attached. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts from the Oil and Gas Global Network. They've got several podcasts about the industry. And one of the hosts on several occasions has talked about how in the past you could tell how experienced somebody was by how many fingers they had left. And that's just not something we want to have happen anymore. We want everybody going home with everything attached. So at the end of the day, though, process safety is about avoiding what I've captured at the bottom of the screen here. That's what inspired me to build this Petrel workflow that I'll be discussing later in the talk. This is an entry from a tower report, and it just says, you know, we drilled to 2124 meters, lost control of the well, the rig burned down, no injuries. So at least there were no injuries, right? But rig burning down is a terrible loss of a facility, a loss of capital, and it's just things we don't want to do anymore. So what are some of the things that a geologist might do with relation to process safety? It could be as simple as picking tops. Picking tops is a process. You want to make sure your picks are consistent across the board, consistent with the rest of your company, and stuff like that. So you also want to be able to discuss your facies, your lithologies, building your maps and cross sections so everything's consistent, everything's labeled and up to date. Identifying your geohazards, documenting all that information. Knowing your hydrogeology, what's happening in your stratigraphy, so what fluids are there, what pressures can you expect, is there H2S in the system, what's your geological chemistry, so do you have swelling clays, for example. Integrating with the rest of your team. It's a multidisciplinary process. So you want to integrate with your petrophysics, your geophysics, reservoir engineering. Geomechanics is a critical part of well control. So integrating with your geomechanics. Your drilling team to build a drilling prognosis. Again, if your picks for what you're expecting these stratigraphy or your formations to come in are off, and you have an overpressured zone that comes in 20 meters high, for example, it could lead to potential disaster. You also want to integrate with the rest of your well planning team, so your surface people. Just because you have a dart in the wall, so to speak, doesn't mean you can actually drill there, because if your pad, for example, is say on the edge of a cut bank of an active river that's flooding, that might not be the best place to put a well pad. Talking with your regulatory people, knowing what geological aspects you need to collect for your regulator. Here in Alberta, there are definite regulations for catching cuttings and submitting geological data to the government. Knowing your minerals, and by minerals I mean your mineral land position. I actually had an incident early in my career where the report came back from my landman that we had 100% of our land, but it turned out we only had 100% of 50% of our spacing unit. So we couldn't go ahead with that, unfortunately. And finally, making sure you have all the technical assurance by the authorities with your company. But there's much more than that, and you can't get too comprehensive or we'll be here all morning. So for well control, not to make a joke, but on the hole, you want to keep your hole inside the hole. There are two main aspects of well control, basically the rocks and the rig. On the rock side, you have your formation pore pressure and your pore pressure prediction. This comes from your hydrogeological aspects and your reservoir engineering. You also have your geomechanical aspects. So your strength of your subsurface formations, your stratigraphy, what's your fracture gradient? If your mud gets too heavy, you're going to frack the rocks with the drilling mud, and we don't want that to happen. On the drilling technology side, we have our use of casing and mud density, using that in coordination with the PPFG prediction to plan your casing strings and your mud weights to offset your pore pressure, but you want to be less than your rock strength. We also have operational procedures such as process safety and your technological equipment at the surface, such as your blowout preventers, to prevent an influx or shut in a well, similar to what you see here in this animation. I have an image of a set of shear rams cutting off some drill pipe, closing in the well. Our primary defense barrier for kicks and blowouts is our circulation and our drilling mud. And just in cartoon form, our mud starts in our mud pits, our mud tank, goes through the pumps, up into the drawworks, down through our drill pipe, and then up the annulus and back over the shale shaker, and finally back into our mud pit, our mud tanks, before it goes all again. Our mud has a bunch of functions. It's like vital importance to drilling. It's a critical part of the well. With regards to our bit and the drill string, it keeps everything cool and it lubricates the bit. It manages our formation pressure. It keeps our formation fluid in situ where it's supposed to be instead of coming up your well. Your lost circulation materials and other additives to your mud will make a filter cake buildup and hopefully after a while prevent further influx of mud into the stratigraphy. You do want a little bit of invasion, but you don't want too much or you will damage your formation. Wellbore stability, you'll have chemistry added to your mud to prevent swelling clays, for example. And your mud weight is a critical aspect in preventing breakouts from happening and your well caving in on you. And you'll also get tensile fractures, again, dependent on your mud weights. Your mud will clear cuttings from the bottom. You want a nice clean hole as you're drilling along. So it lifts the cuttings out of the hole and suspends your cuttings when you're not circulating. And lastly but not least, it's your telemetry medium for your downhole tools. A lot of well drilling these days happens with measure well drilling tools, and the mud is the medium to transmit the data back up to the surface. As I said, your mud is your key control for the pressure at the bottom of the hole to keep your formation fluids in your formations. And there's 3 ways to control the bottom hole pressure. The first way, the classic way, is with your static mud weight, which is basically just your mud density. If you've ever gone swimming and you feel the pressure on your ears, that's all this is. So with the mud not circulating, the pumps are off, you'll have no pressure at the surface and a pressure of X at the bottom of the hole. When you turn your mud pumps on and get things circulating, you'll have a little bit of pressure at the surface from the pressure applied from your mud pumps. You'll also have some friction happening with which adjusts your mud weights a little bit. So you'll have an increase in your mud pressure at the bottom of the hole relative to when your mud is just standing still. And our third way is one of the newer technologies in drilling. It's called managed pressure drilling, or MPD. And by applying a choke at the surface where your mud comes out of the hole, you can actually increase your mud pressure at the bottom to whatever you want it to be, and up to a maximum, of course, of your frac gradient. But at a minimum, it'll still be your static mud weight. Well control, as I said, is a function of pressure management. On the left side of the equation, we have our geomechanics, our hydrogeology. So what's your overburden pressure? What's your pore pressures? What's our frac pressure of the well, or your geomechanical rock strength? And what pressures do you need to keep your hole stable and not collapsing on you? On the other side of the equation, we have the pressures in our well bore and things we can control, such as your mud weight or your hydrostatic pressure, which is a function of your density and the height of your mud column. You also have your hydrodynamic pressure, so when the pump's on, your equivalent circulating density, or your ECD. If you're using MPD technology, you can control the weight even further. And of course, your wellbore geometry, so your casing design and any blowout preventers you might have on the surface to prevent kicks or blowouts from happening. Where do we get some of the data to calculate our pore pressure and fracture gradients? On the geological side and geomechanical side, you've got your geomechanical model, which comes in part from looking at your density logs to calculate your vertical gradient, or your vertical principal stress. You can calculate Poissons and other things from dipole sonic logs. You got your other geophysical properties that you can get from your geophysicist. If you have well breakouts in the area or tensile fractures, that can help you constrain your geomechanical model a bit. And with your least principal stress, your frac gradient, you have fractures, you have mini fracs, and DFIT, or diagnostic formation integrity tests, can all tell you for any individual part of the subsurface what your frac gradient is going to be. On the pressure side, you can find drill stem tests or repeat formation tester data. You can get wellhead pressures from flowing wells, flow tests, buildup tests. Talk to your reservoir engineer. They have all that information for you, and they're happy to help. Putting together an effective pore pressure fracture gradient prediction should be a team effort. This is how we did it at the supermajor where I worked. The geologist would have a lot of information they provide: lithology, geological models, drilling prognosis with your tops, your hydrogeological information such as your pressures, what expected fluids you have, is the stratigraphy, is it sour or not? You get some of this information from your petrophysicist, a lot of information from your geomechanics specialist, which may or may not be the petrophysicist or your geologist, or your geophysics or your geophysicist, as it may be. They'll provide information from their geophysical model. That information would all go to our reservoir engineer, who would combine this data and build the PPFG model with support from the others on the team. And they would also include some reservoir fluid pressure data as well, coming into that PPFG model. That model would be fed to the drilling engineer, who ultimately designs the casing and the mud program. Here's an example of a PPFG chart. This was provided to me from Amy Fox, and she called it the mud weight window, which is comprised of your pore pressure, your borehole collapse pressure, or your breakout line, and the fracture gradient. So ideally, you want your recommended mud weight to be definitely more than your pore pressure, definitely less than your frac gradient, and depending on your tolerance for borehole breakout, you could have it a little bit above or a little bit below. It's all dependent on your company's tolerance for having cavings coming into your hole. What's breakout pressure? Just to get into it a little bit further, well, it's the pressure at which you start getting wellbore breakouts coming into your well. If you have, you can calculate it based on your mud weight. It's a function of mud weight and your rock strength and the hoop stresses around your well. Breakouts will happen in the direction of the maximum principal stress, or SH max. And the angle of the breakout will stay consistent. It can break out forever in this direction or in that direction, but the angle will always remain the same as a function of your mud weight. So if your angle is small, in this case it's about 30 degrees, you're not going to have any issues. But if that angle is 180 degrees or more, then you're going to start getting into washout conditions. You'll get some caverns forming around your borehole. These cavings will come into your well, and if things get too far out of control, you could end off with a pack-off situation wherein your cuttings are just basically clogging up your well. You won't be able to circulate. You won't be able to move your pipe. Your pipe could get stuck, and it's just bad all around. So you definitely want to avoid a washout situation, but your tolerance for what your wellbore breakout angle could be varies from company to company. Your fracture gradient is quite important. In this case, it's this really light green line that's kind of hard to see, and I've put my mud weight just on the right side of that line. So what's going to happen is now your mud pressure is greater than your rock strength, and you're going to frack the well with a hydrofrac, and you're going to lose your mud into those fractures. So as you're losing your mud into the fractures, your mud weight or your mud column is going to get smaller, which reduces your hydrostatic pressure, and If you lose too much fluid into the well, then your mud's gonna lose the weight on the formation, and ultimately, if you don't get control of it, it's gonna get less than your pore pressure, and now your well is gonna start flowing at you. So again, exceeding your fracture gradient is not a good thing. You want it to be in that sweet spot in between your frac gradient and your pore pressure. And ideally, just high enough that you're not going to have too many breakouts. Finally, the final aspect is the pore pressure. There's two ways of drilling wells. You can drill it overbalanced, where your mud's higher than your pore pressure. You'll get a little bit of your mud going into the stratigraphy. Hopefully you have enough lost circulation materials and other additives to your mud to build up a nice filter cake, so that'll prevent too much mud from going into your stratigraphy. On the other hand, if you're drilling underbalanced, which is a somewhat common practice, but it's not the recommended ideal, you could get your formation fluids flowing into your well and taking a kick. A kick is essentially a flow of formation fluids into the well bore during your drilling operations. Schlumberger has a nice definition here. Kicks come from becoming underbalanced with your mud. So your mud weight is now too low. Perhaps your pore pressure and fracture gradient prediction was incorrect, or you've hit an abnormal pressure that wasn't expected. You could have lost circulation. Perhaps your dynamic weight exceeded the frac pressure, and you lost your mud into the hole, or you've lost circulation for other reasons, but your hydrostatic pressure's gone down, and now you're underbalanced and taking an influx. Or lots of kicks happen during tripping, and you have to make sure you're filling up your hole with mud while you're pulling pipe out, because your pipe does have a volume to it, and just like sticking your hand in a glass of water, right, it's going to spill over. When you take your hand out, the water level goes down. Same thing when you're pulling pipe out of the hole. Make sure you're filling the hole back up with mud so you don't wind up with an underpressured situation. The other thing that can happen while you're tripping is taking an induced kick. If you're pulling your drill bit out too fast, you could wind up with a plunger effect or a syringe effect and sucking fluids into your wellbore and inducing a kick that way. So here's an example of a PPFG and casing plan, and we have our formation pressure. It's increasing gradually. All of a sudden, there's a great big increase in the formation pressure, and then it's relatively gradual again by the prediction. But there's an unknown quantity down here where it's a little bit overpressured. Something similar is happening with our fracture gradient. It's gradually increasing. We have a sudden increase, and then it increases gradually again. So we plan around that. We can't use our lighter mud the whole way down, because once you get down to here, you're under pressured and you're going to take a kick. You can't use your heavier mud, because when you're up in this area, you're going to frack your well and you're going to lose your mud that way. So we mitigate that by running a casing string right about here and then increasing our mud going down. But because we had this unexpected zone, we'd take a kick, and that's something we don't want to happen, but you can, in this case, have enough mud pressure to mitigate for it. But if you knew about this high pressure zone, you could mitigate it again by increasing your mud weight and adding another casing run. If you look carefully, this mud, you can't run it the whole way up, because again, once you get to about this level, you'd be fracking your rocks again up here. So the way to mitigate around that, as I said, is running another casing string and then increasing your mud and going forward from there. If you're out on the rig and you're taking a kick, there's a few warning signs that can tell you something's happening. If your flow rate of mud coming out of the hole is increasing, or your volume of mud coming out is greater than your volume coming in, you might be having an incident. You might see a pit volume increase in your mud tanks. Again, it's because the mud coming out is being displaced by something coming into the wellbore. If your well is flowing when the pumps are off, there's definitely something happening. And we'll see an example of this coming up in quite a shocking little video. Or if your hole fill up is out of balance. As I said, when you're pulling out a hole, you have to replace the mud. But if you have less mud going in than you do pipe coming out, there might be something happening. Other secondary indicators for taking a kick, you might see your pump pressure decrease or an increase in your pump strokes. You might see a weight change on your drill string. If you see a drilling break, it could be because you've entered a less or a more permeable zone that's easier to drill. If that zone happens to be overpressured, you could take a kick. Or if you see your cut mud weight, so if your mud density is decreasing quite rapidly because it's, say, full of gas coming in from your wellbore, that could also indicate that you're taking a kick. If you don't control a kick in time, you could wind up with a blowout. And here's some rip from the headlines just from the last few years. Blowouts are quite dangerous. You could lose equipment, or worse, you could wind up with fatalities. And most of these incidents did have fatalities associated with them. The image you see here is from an incident that happened in 1982 here in Alberta called Lodgepole. There were 2 fatalities during this blowout. 16 people were hospitalized. The well was flowing openly for 60 days, before it was closed in. But beyond that, this zone was sour that was blowing out. So there was a lot of H2S released into the atmosphere for 60 days. So this incident all by itself changed the regulatory process in the province of Alberta forever. And hopefully it's changed for the better. And you can look that up on the Alberta Energy Regulator's website. I've got the link down here. I call this slide 2.5 minutes to disaster. This is a video I found initially on LinkedIn, but I did ultimately find a copy of it on YouTube where I was able to make these animations for you. So about 4:37 and 42 seconds is my T0. Everything looks normal. The people on the drill floor are just going about their business. But 42 seconds later, they start playing around with the drawworks. There's something happening up here. Somebody gets up on the spinner, which I personally have safety issues with, but to each their own, I suppose. But that's not the real safety issue that's happening here. If you look down below at the Kelly, you can see there's mud bubbling up right around the drill pipe. Now, if you were watching closely, you'll have noticed the mud was already happening here at our T equals 0. A minute after this point, you can see they're still playing around with the drawworks. More mud is coming out, and nobody's paying attention to this. It's almost as if they have a fixation syndrome on whatever's happening up here, and they're not paying attention to what's happening at their feet. And just to add a little extra safety, he loses his hard hat and never decides to pick it up again. But he doesn't really have time to pick it up because 20 seconds after that, this is happening. Our well's starting to blow out. It's almost too late to activate the BOPs now. And again, 20 seconds later after that, it's all over. And the well catches fire, and hopefully there were no fatalities on this. I don't know much information beyond what was in the video. I'm not even 100% sure where this happened. I do know it's not Oklahoma. If If you come to this video, it'll say it's Oklahoma, but the incident referred to in Oklahoma has actually happened in 2018 and 2019, and this incident happened in 2011. So whatever the label happens to be, that's not what it was in the YouTube video. This is an incident that happened in British Columbia in Canada, near a place called Fort Nelson. So you can see the derrick just collapsed. In this case, they were snubbing out their bottom hole assembly, lost well control, and a fire happened. And ultimately, the rig was lost. So this kind of stuff, we never want to see it happen. And process safety is hopefully going to stop these things from happening in the future. So one other aspect of process safety that we were working on at the companies that I was working at last was building a kicks and blowouts table that would go into the well book, that would sit in the doghouse, it would sit in the shack where the on-site representative worked from. A good blowouts and kicks table will have your incident type, it'll have the date, it'll have a well identifier. Normally I'd put the well name in here, but just for slide space, I put our well license number instead. It'll have the depth where it happened, stratigraphy, what formation did it happen in. This isn't always right. Sometimes a blue sky could be a Gething formation, for example. If you have an influx side, or influx size, if it's known, what's our shut-in drill pipe pressure? What's the shut-in casing pressure? What was the density of the mud when it happened? These values are in kilograms. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to translate these into pounds. I did later on, but I forgot to do these ones. What was the mud density that ultimately controlled these kicks? This particular spreadsheet I got from the British Columbia Oil and Gas Commission. They have all these data online, which we'll cover in a minute here, but sometimes it's missing. So if you have some data that's missing, go to your well files, pull your tower sheets. There's tons of information in them, including your mud report. And these data are all vital for planning wells in the future. If you don't have towers, maybe you have end of well reports or well summaries from your well site geologist or your mud logger. Check your daily morning reports that are either faxed in, or now that it's the 2020s, they're probably emailed in every morning. On those reports, you can get all this information. Mud density, shut-in drill pipe pressure, casing pressure, what was your mud weight when the incident happened. In this case, they didn't have a kick, they got a blowout. Double check your sources. Sometimes your data might change from report to report. There's just so much good information out there, you just have to dig and find it. Once it's done though, it'll look like this. You'll have your controlled mud, you'll have your occurrence mud. If it's a blowout, well, you won't have control mud, but that's because it blew out. But what are we going to do with this next? Like I said, it goes into your well planning documents. You should have copies of this on the rig, but I'm a geologist. I'm a more visual person. I'd rather see the data presented to me visually than look at a table like this. It means a lot more to me. And so this is the workflow that I developed when I was at my last position. I was starting to implement it, but ran out of time before I left the company to fully get this going. And I encourage you to follow this and talk to your colleagues about doing this in the future. I think this is a step that we can add to process safety that will improve well safety going forwards. So the key is now we're visualizing these kicks and blowouts as they happened. So our data and methodologies going into this. For this project, I used the British Columbia Oil and Gas Commission kicks and blowouts database. Then I imported that into Petrel using point well data the point well data import functionality. And then I posted the data in various Petrel windows, 2D maps, 3D maps, and of course a cross-section. Now, why did I do it this way? Well, I was working in British Columbia at the time on projects that were there, and the OGC has it mandatory that if you have a kick or a blowout that you have to file a report on it. The report has a lot of that information that I discussed earlier, and that information is tabulated in a spreadsheet that you can download from their website for free. So there's no cost to do it, and it's easy to find the information and download it all and build your tables. Why did I use Petrel? Well, that's the software that my company was using at the time when I developed this workflow. But really, you could do this in Excel if you wanted to. So the software doesn't matter. It's the workflow and the procedure that does. So even though I use Petrel, you could do this in Geographics, you could do this in Kingdom, you could do this in Petra. In North America, there's a couple other programs. There's AccuMap, there's GeoScout, and I'm sure there's other software packages that I don't even know are out there. But the point is, as long as you can build a visualization cross-section and add those kicks data as points, that's all you need. So yes, this example is Petrel, but you don't need Petrel to do it. So I got my data from the OGC. They have an e-library that has all this information on it. The link is up above. They're going through some website changes right now, so in the future, this link might change a little bit, but it's still up there, I promise. Once you get into the OGC e-library, if you don't have a user ID, you can sign up as a new user. Then you'll just log in, click the submit button to get along. This website shouldn't change too much. You'll see that we have the drilling kicks and blowouts by area CSV file. You'll want to click on that. The next page that comes up will give you a date range. I use usually today's date. You can see I built this slide in April. On the low end of the date range, I put 1900. The OGC started collecting the data in the 1970s, but just to make sure I have everything, I always put in 1900 as my start date. When you click submit from there, your file will download, so you want to find whatever folder it's gone to. And then you'll open up that CSV file in Excel. So this one's called RSVWlets, something like that. You'll click on that, open it up into Excel, and it will look something like this. Everything's nicely tabulated. You have a well identifier, which in this particular spreadsheet is actually the well license number. They don't have the well name on here. That would be my one suggestion for the OGC to change in the future, is to put the well name there. But that's okay. We still have a unique identification for the well in the well license number. But you see there's some empty spaces and there's some other issues. So we're going to have to QC this before we go further. With this particular spreadsheet, you'll notice that some of the comment sections will spill over into multiple lines. When you go to import these into Petrel, it's going to not like this. Petrel likes everything in a single row. So we're going to have to take these comments that spilled over and put them in a single row. It's up to you if you want to try and incorporate them all into a single cell, or if you want to add more cells in the row. That's your choice. But the key is that every single line belongs to one single incident. Because this particular download only has the well license number as a well identifier, you'll have to match them with the well identifier that's in Petrel. Otherwise, it's not going to know where to put the data. So to do that, I took my Petrel database, I copied it over, Luckily, my Petrel database had my well license numbers in it, so I could use either VLOOKUP or index match to bring the Petrel well identifier into each incident. And with that done now, Petrel will understand where the data goes and it knows where to put it. Watch your units. You might be in a jurisdiction where you have mixed units, say your depths are in metric, in meters, but your pressures are in pounds per gallon. So make sure your units match across everything you're doing. When you don't match your units, you could do what NASA did and crash the Mars Climate Orbiter into Mars. That happened because half their team was using metric, half the team was using imperial, and nobody noticed. So they lost $1 billion probe smashing that into Mars. You probably noticed earlier there's some empty cells. The best way to fill those empty cells, as I said earlier on, is search your drilling towers. Dig into well files, find the data. It's all there somewhere. You just have to find it. If you can't find it at the end of the day, you'll want to fill in missing cells with whatever your null value is going to be when you import it into Petrel. This is the best way to do it, just in case Petrel doesn't like those empty cells. Then at least you're telling Petrel that this cell is supposed to be empty. The next step is to bring this data into Petrel. So we start out with our Excel version of the spreadsheet. We'll open up Petrel. You'll click the Insert tab, go to New Point Well Data, and then go through the import phase. So you'll find your file, click OK. That'll start up the import screen. And you'll notice at the top of the screen, we have these attribute boxes. Petrel wants to know, is this cell or is this column happen to be numbers? Is it text strings? Is it dates? There's a whole legion of things it can be. So make sure you have these filled in properly so Petrel knows what data you're bringing in. And double check your null value. Make sure it matches what's in your spreadsheet. Otherwise, you're going to get numbers that you don't like. So if you check your null value, make sure it matches, then Petrel will know what to look for. And it'll bring it in just as empty cells or these double quotation marks. The one thing I liked about bringing it into Petrel with the point well data is now every single one of these incident points exists in X, Y, and Z space. So you got your X, Y in map space and your depth. And it applies it to the well in your well measured depth or a long hole depth, whichever expression you prefer for that. Our next step is we want to display these data in a well section window. So we'll go to the Window tab, starting in well section window. If you're a Petrel user, you already know this. You can either create a new template, or if you have an existing template, you can build it from scratch or use one that you've already built. I like to keep it simple. So I like to have just two tracks, my gamma ray track, so you can watch your gamma ray, and a mud weight track, and this will post it in mud weight space. So I have 1 point for my incident mud, 1 point for my control mud, and at first these are the initial data points that I like to bring in. There are some other things you want besides your incident control points. List your key tops. When I built this screen capture with Schlumberger, I only had half a morning to work with them, so we didn't bother turning all these extra tops off. They just clutter things up. So you just keep your key tops on there for where things happen or major zones along the way. If you have mud weight curves that you've built out of those drilling towers, that's really handy to put on because then you can see what mud weights they're using when they increase their mud. Things like that, just visually on the well section. If you know your distances, you can find how far you are away from the pad that you're planning. I just made these numbers here. It's good to go 15 kilometers or 10 miles out. Just as a rule of thumb. You might want to go further depending on your company's policies. And double check your incident stratigraphy labels that are in the spreadsheet. So once you got it in Petrel, I mentioned maybe it's labeled as blue sky, but it was really Gething, for example. You go back and update your stratigraphy column back in the spreadsheet and in the Petrel database. Now that you've got it displayed, you can visually see in mud weight space, that's a bit of a tongue twister, where your kicks happen. So I can look at this at a glance. I know my Charlie Lake kicks all happened in the range of about 1,000 kilograms per meter cubed, or roughly 8.3 pounds per gallon. And the mud that it took to control these wells was all around 1,600 kilograms per meter, or 13.5 pounds per gallon. Just by looking at my cross section again, down here in the Montney, I can see my kicks ranged from 1,300 to 2,100 kilograms, or 11 to about 17.5 pounds. And my control muds came in the 1,900 kilograms to 2,500 kilograms, or the 16 to 21 pound per gallon mud weights. Like I said, I'm a visual person, so visualizing it this way makes a lot more sense to me than looking at it in a table. Once you've got that visualization, it's my opinion that you should take this, print it out, and put it on the rig. Hang it in the doghouse, hang it in the brake shack, or in the control room, perhaps in the shack where your on-site representative works, or even better, somewhere where you can pull it out to talk about it in the shift safety meeting at the beginning of every shift. Why do you want it out on the rig? And especially, why do you want to talk about it during your safety meeting? Is you're empowering everybody that's out there. So everybody knows that, for example, hey, we're right here at the start of our shift, we're coming up on this Charlie Lake zone, and within a few kilometers where we're at, there were a whole bunch of kicks in the Charlie Lake. So it's just giving that heads up in the safety meeting that something could be coming. It gives them a chance, if they know that something might be coming, to keep an eye out for that, so we don't end up like that incident where we saw those videos where everybody's working on the trop drive while the mud's bubbling up around their feet. If they're watching for it, then they can shut in the well earlier and start making kill mud earlier, for example. It might give you a chance to schedule a drill kick. So if you know you're coming up on the Charlie Lake and you know it's going to throw a whole bunch of kicks at you, you might want to schedule a kick for the start of the shift. It lets you a chance to review your mud before you enter that zone, right? So if you're in that JSA at the beginning of the shift and you're saying, hey, here's our Charlie Lake, these kicks are all happening around 1,000 kilograms and our mud's only at 950, maybe we should increase our mud weight before we get into the Charlie Lake. Just a little bit of anticipatory safety discussion before things happen. You can also visualize in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. For example, here's my imaginary pad that I'm drilling. We got 2 horizontal legs that are growing out on the either side of this well that happen to have a kick in it. Here's several other kicks that happened within a reasonable distance from where my fictional pad might be. You can build it in a 3-dimensional window. You can see the people on this well had several fairly bad days. You can incorporate it into your 3-dimensional geological model. Once these data are in your software, the possibilities are literally endless. Don't stop there. You can do more with your data. Post where you've had lost circulation. You could post flags for what zones are sour, for example. What is your completion string going to be? put your completion string into Petrel, which is another workflow I did. I show my completion string and project where potential frac hits might happen. So you might want to visualize, where you want to block off or not frac your well based on where frac hits could occur. Geomechanical information, if you have the original PPFGs for those wells, or you could post your caliper on there to show where there's been washouts. If you have cement bond log data, you could post that in your cross-section. And again, this isn't limited to Petrel. The other software that I'm familiar with out here in Calgary that's commonly used, Geographics, Petrel, Kingdom, AccuMap, GeoScout are usually North American exclusive, but these other packages are used globally, I'm pretty sure. So, whatever software package you're using, even if it's Excel, you could build one of these visualizations. I apologize for that.
Call from 90595.
Just one moment, please. We'll let this go through the thing. What are some challenges you might expect trying to implement this workflow? Well, the first and the obvious one is data. Out here in Canada, well data is made publicly available. In Alberta and British Columbia, for example, your well data is considered exclusive. It's confidential for a set period of time, and when that time expires, it becomes public, and anyone can buy the data from the government. Like I said, AccuMap and GeoScout are both companies that take the data and build them into their mapping packages. Not every jurisdiction is so lucky though, so you might have to contact your competitors, do data swaps, buy data from them, whatever it takes to get the data from wells that have had kicks. So it really depends on your jurisdiction and your regulator. Perhaps like British Columbia, your regulator collects well incident data and puts it out publicly. Checking your data accuracy, checking your data currency, making sure everything's up to date. Your software packages, like I said, this was in Petrel, but most commonly used software packages, if you can build a cross-section and post point data, you can do this. Are the data in this software internally kept, like in AccuMap or GeoScout? Or do you have to bring your data from an external source through your data manager, like Petrel or Petra or Kingdom, or even Geographics? And our last major hurdle for implementing these workflows would be cultural. This is kind of new. Hopefully it's interesting. Hopefully you can talk your management into doing it. And you might see some resistance from your rig crew. It's like, why are we talking about geology? We just want to drill a well. I think if you can prove the point that, hey, if I can make you aware that something's coming up and you're prepared for it, we can mitigate for it, we can plan for it, we can be prepared for something if something happens. And hopefully they buy into it. So just to sum everything up, rig safety starts back in the office. It starts the moment that you pick a top on a cross-section. You take all that information, you document it, you document your hazards, you build your PPFG, you build your kicks and blowouts table. All that goes into the well planning documentation. You might want to bring that up in a drilling well on paper exercise with the rig crew before you go out and actually drill the wells. It could happen, like I said, you bring out the cross-section and the JSA at the start of the shift and say, hey, we're here, there's kicks coming up, maybe. How's our mud doing? Whatever it takes to mitigate a kick or a blowout from happening, it'll save equipment, it'll save lives, and save money for your company. So I'd like to thank everybody for your attention. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, you can find me at kurtarmbruster.ca. That'll take you right to my LinkedIn profile. Or if you have your cell phone on you, scan this QR code. Again, it'll take you right to my LinkedIn profile. A little bit about the Operations Geology Division at the Canadian Society of Petroleum Geologists. We do monthly talks that start in September and run through about May or June every year. With the COVID situation happening, everything's a little up in the air right now, but we're hoping that starting in September that all our talks will be streamed online live, and you can sign up to watch the talks at our website. I've shortened it down for you here. It's bit.ly/CSPGops, and that'll take you to our site at the Canadian Society of Petroleum Geologists. So if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer. Thanks again.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kurtz, for this amazing presentation. I have some couple of questions from the audience. The first question is from Salam Khan, who's asking how the geologist related to reservoir engineer.
Okay, so ideally you'll be sitting on a multifunctional team, and hopefully your reservoir engineer is just a few offices down. I would walk over and talk to my reservoir engineer all the time. I've sort of had a little bit of a passion for hydrodynamics and hydrogeology. In terms of petroleum hydrogeology, I very nearly went back to do a master's thesis on that. But hopefully your reservoir engineer is just a few doors down or a few seats down, and it's always just easy just to go and talk to them. You know, while you're building your PPFG chart, or while they're building their PPFG chart, go and have a chat. Ask them how it's coming. Ask them if they need any information, and just give them a hand.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Salam Khan again, who's asking what is the limitation of Petrel in case of well control?
The limitations of Petrel? Basically, it's the limitations of your imagination. Petrel tends to be a 3D modeling software package. I'm not an expert in Petrel. You'll have to talk to somebody from Schlumberger more about that. It's a Schlumberger package. But in terms of limitations, you can import data into Petrel. You can import any type of data into Petrel, and you can display it in 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional maps. As I had back here a little ways, no, just on this slide, for example, I can build 3-dimensional imagery of my maps. In this case, I had where the incidents happened in the wellbore and the well name, but I could just as easily post the shut-in casing pressure or the shut-in drill pipe pressure or the mud weights. As long as you have the data, you can post it in Petrel. Beyond that, I'm not sure what other limitations you might be wondering about.
Right. The next question is from, wow, he asked a lot of questions. Salam Khan again. So you want to know which of the following more affected by blowout, whether it's OPEX or CAPEX? I think you meant CAPEX.
Oh, that's a good question. I would probably say it would be CAPEX. That's just my guess. I'm by no means an economist. But if you have a blowout, you're going to have lost time. It's non-productive time on the rig because now you're fighting a blowout or you're fighting a kick. If your blowout turns out like lodgepole here and everything burns to the ground, then that's, I'm assuming, a loss of CAPEX because, you know, that capital that went into the rig, you've lost the rig's burned down completely. You're going to have to buy a new rig or get a new rig. Somebody's going to have to build a new rig and invest capital to rebuild that facility. There's loss on ESG, your environment, society, and government's rating. Depending on your regulatory environment, they could shut you down if you have too many incidents like this. So yeah, there's a whole lot of issues that come with having a massive incident, such as the lodgepole one. And as I said earlier, lodgepole changed the regulatory environment in this province 30 years ago, and we haven't had as many incidents in the last 30 years, but they still happen from time to time. So yeah, my guess would be it's a CapEx issue because it happens while you're drilling, whereas OpEx is more once the well is producing.
Okay, and I have one question from Johannes Nwara, who's asking, do you think the pressure data derived from seismic and sonic log data?
Oh, pressure from seismic and sonic. To be quite honest, I don't know how to calculate that. You might need to talk to a petrophysics expert. I'm unaware of being able to calculate pressure directly from seismic or sonic data. Yeah, the honest answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. The last question will be do you have any advice for young geologists out there who's thinking of joining the industry? What advice can you give them, like professionally?
Yeah. A few things. Number one, no matter what you do, never stop learning. There's always new information out there. There's always new things to learn, new software packages. I just did a geomechanics. I actually did 2 geomechanics courses in the first half of this year. They were spectacular. They're online. You can take them for free from Stanford. Learn coding if you can. If you understand Python, I think that would be a valuable asset. A lot of software nowadays can incorporate Python, like ArcGIS. Always keeping current. Never stop networking. LinkedIn is great for that. Contribute to things people are posting. Encourage friends to join the discussion. You can build a fantastic network that way. And never give up hope. We're geologists. It's our job to be optimistic. And I know things are interesting right now, but things could change in the future. And so yeah, my advice, never stop learning. Always be proactive and always keep positive and keep going for it.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Kurt, for
Yeah.
this amazing presentation, and thank you for your time. It was a pleasure having you, and we hope to see you again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.